They came dressed in fake uniforms, holding toy-looking badges, shouting orders like they were running a SWAT operation. Four black SUVs sped down the dirt road leading to my ranch, kicking up a thick cloud of dust behind them. I was just finishing a cup of black coffee on my porch, watching the sunrise glow across my acres of land when I saw them roll in. The first guy out of the lead SUV wore mirrored sunglasses, a vest that read HOA Enforcement Unit, and carried what looked like a paintball gun dressed up to look like a rifle. He pointed it at me like I was some criminal. "This is a legal HOA inspection," he barked. "Step away from the property." I didn't move. I didn't even blink. You see, I'm a retired Navy SEAL, and this was my land. Every inch of it bought with blood, sweat, and years of sacrifice. If these clowns thought they could intimidate me, they had no idea what kind of storm they were walking into. The second man hopped out of the car and began shouting to the others, "Sweep the barns! Secure the perimeter!" A third guy pulled out what looked like a clipboard and began taking pictures of my tractor and fence. My hands were resting calmly on the porch rail, but my eyes scanned every movement. My instincts kicked in fast. "Y'all got about 10 seconds to explain who you are and what you're doing on my ranch before things get real bad," I said in a calm, low voice. They didn't listen. Instead, one of them shouted back, "We've got the right to be here. Your ranch is in violation of HOA Code 52A. This land is under review." And that's when it hit me. These weren't real officers. They didn't have official badges. Their vests were stitched cheap. One of their patches was even crooked. And there is no such thing as HOA Code 52A. I slowly stepped off the porch. The man with the fake gun pointed it directly at my chest. "Back up," he yelled. "You don't want to mess with us." He was shaking. I gave him one last warning. "You boys picked the wrong ranch." In a flash, I disarmed him, twisted the fake weapon from his hand, and pinned him on the ground before he could blink. The others froze. I was trained for real combat. They were trained in fantasy roleplay. "Everybody on the ground," I shouted. "Now!" And they dropped like toddlers caught stealing candy. One even whimpered, "Please don't hurt us." My dog, Murphy, a big old German shepherd who's more bark than bite, came running out from the barn, growling low. That alone was enough to make one of the men wet himself. I could see the wet patch spreading down his khakis as he fell flat on the dirt. Just then, I heard my neighbor, Mrs. Larson, screaming from across the field. "Frank, what's going on?" That's when it all started to make sense. These punks weren't strangers. They were from the new development down the road. The same group of HOA nutjobs that had been pestering me for months, trying to claim my ranch was within their community boundaries. Except it wasn't. Not even close. Now they had taken it a step too far. I tied them up with zip ties I kept in my barn, sat them down under the shade of a big oak, and called the sheriff. But it wasn't just about calling the law. I needed to know who was behind this little fake operation, because someone had given them the nerve, the tools, and probably the gas money to come all the way out here and try to raid my property like it was part of their HOA circus. While I waited, I sat on my porch, arms crossed, watching the imposters squirm in the dirt. The guy with the clipboard kept mumbling, "We didn't know he was a SEAL. We didn't know." The sheriff finally rolled in about 30 minutes later, lights flashing, dust trailing behind him. He stepped out of the cruiser and let out a long whistle when he saw the group on the ground. "Frank," he said, tipping his hat, "what in God's name happened here?" "They claim to be HOA police," I said. "Tried to storm my property like I'm growing something illegal in the barn. They're fakes." Sheriff Harris looked over the men, shaking his head in disbelief. "Well, this is a new one." He took their IDs, what few they had, and began questioning them one by one. The main guy, turned out his name was Kyle, claimed they were part of the Special HOA Compliance Division. "Which doesn't exist," Sheriff Harris said flatly. "I just did what I was told," Kyle stammered. "We thought we had legal right." "To do what?" I asked. "Stage a pretend SWAT raid?" "We were told your property was part of the new zone," Kyle said. "The HOA president said you'd been dodging fines, ignoring notices. He told us to bring you in line. Bring me in line? That's when it clicked. The president of their HOA was a real estate developer named Ted Warner. He'd been trying to buy my ranch for over a year, always sending fancy letters with pitiful offers. I told him no every time. Looks like he decided to use scare tactics next. Sheriff Harris looked as mad as I was. You folks are in big trouble. He loaded the fake officers into the back of his cruiser while I untied the rest, keeping a hand on my belt just in case anyone tried anything stupid. As the last one was cuffed, I turned to Harris. This ain't over, is it? No, he said. Not by a long shot. Later that evening, I walked the edge of my fence line. I could still see their SUV tire tracks in the dirt. I could still feel the adrenaline in my chest. But worse than that, I could feel a storm coming. Not a weather one, but the kind of storm that comes when someone rich and powerful thinks they can scare you into giving up your land. I knew Ted Warner wouldn't stop. The next morning, I woke up to something even worse. My barn was burning. Flames reached high into the sky, black smoke rolling out like angry clouds. I ran outside barefoot, grabbing the garden hose, yelling for Murphy, dialing 911 with shaking fingers. They set my barn on fire. And this time, someone meant to hurt me for real. The fire roared louder than a freight train. My hands shook as I sprayed water at the edge of the barn. But it was no use. The flames had already eaten through the roof. The wood cracked and snapped as black smoke curled up into the sky like a dark warning. I could barely breathe. My eyes burned, my chest tight. Murphy barked wildly beside me, pacing in circles, his nose in the air. He knew something wasn't right. This wasn't an accident. I backed away from the barn as the fire crew pulled up in their red engine. Dust and sirens filled the early morning quiet. A few neighbors had shown up too, drawn by the smoke. I saw Mrs. Larson clutching her bathrobe, her face pale. Even Hank, the old guy with the tractor 2 plots over, looked shaken. The fire chief, a stout man with a gray mustache and a stern jaw, jumped down and ran up to me. "Frank, you all right?" he shouted over the crackle. "I'm fine," I said, even though my lungs felt like sandpaper. "But my barn's gone." Just like that. Took them nearly 40 minutes to kill the flames. By the time the last embers cooled, all that was left was a pile of scorched wood and twisted metal. I stood there, jaw tight, fists clenched. That barn had been built by my father and me when I was just a teenager. It held tools, seed, an old Harley I had restored with my son before he joined the army. Gone. The fire chief came back, nodding toward the black remains. "We found something," he said. He held up a small red gas can. It hadn't melted. It hadn't exploded. Because someone had set the fire with care. Deliberately, he handed it to one of the crew members, then looked at me again. "We'll investigate, but you might want to be careful, Frank. Someone's got it out for you." I didn't need him to tell me that. After they left, I sat on the porch in silence, watching the ashes drift on the breeze. Murphy sat beside me, his head on my boot. I thought about the fake cops. I thought about Ted Warner. I thought about the fire. But most of all, I thought about how I wasn't going to let this scare me off my land. This wasn't just some real estate grab anymore. This was war. But I wasn't going to go charging in just yet. You don't win battles by rushing in blind. I needed intel. I started small. I drove down to the county records office that same afternoon. The lady behind the counter, Denise, had known me for years. She smiled until she saw the look on my face. "What's wrong, Frank?" "I need everything you've got on the Pine Hollow HOA," I said. "Board members, permits, complaints, especially anything involving a guy named Ted Warner." Her smile dropped. "You think they're behind that fire?" "I don't think," I said. "I know." She tapped away at her keyboard. "Give me a few minutes." While I waited, I made some calls to old friends. Friends from the service. One of them, Mike, was a cyber guy. Worked contracts with the government. I told him I needed help tracing digital footprints, tracking fake permits, and finding out how deep Ted's connections ran. "You always find the weirdest trouble," Mike said with a chuckle. "You know me," I replied. "Trouble finds me first." Denise handed me a folder an inch thick. "Here's everything that's public," she said. "But off the record, Ted's got his hands in a lot of pockets. Judges, surveyors, even a few deputies." Of course he did. I took the file home and started digging. I stayed up past midnight, reading through pages of lawsuits, complaints, bribes hidden in construction donations, land zone redraws, and forced HOA expansions. It was worse than I thought. Ted had created this Pine Hollow HOA to stretch out beyond the housing development way beyond. He used fake surveys and shell companies to show that properties like mine were technically in their boundaries. But it was all paper lies. And then I saw something that made my jaw clench. A recent email chain printed and submitted as part of a lawsuit from a neighbor. In it, Ted was bragging to his lawyer, "We'll break him one way or another. If the fake enforcement team doesn't scare him, maybe a little fire will." There it was. Proof. I took a photo with my phone. I saved copies. I printed it 5 times. But I didn't call the sheriff yet. No, this wasn't the time to go legal. Not yet. It was time to send a message. The next morning, I loaded up my truck with lumber, nails, and a brand new set of no trespassing signs. Big ones, painted in bright red. I put them up around the entire ranch on every post, tree, and gate. I also added motion sensor floodlights on the barn ruins and around the main house. Then I built a scarecrow. Not a normal one. This one wore tactical gear. An old uniform I didn't use anymore. I mounted a plastic rifle in its arms and put it right at the end of my driveway, where anyone driving by would see it. That night, I sat in my rocking chair, a thermos of coffee in one hand, a real rifle across my lap. Murphy didn't bark once, but I could feel eyes on me. Someone was out there, watching, waiting. At exactly 2:17 a.m., my motion detector alarm went off. My phone buzzed. I checked the feed from the security cam I'd hidden in the oak tree near the entrance. 2 figures, hooded. One held a crowbar. The other carried a gas can. Again, I shot up to my feet, heart pounding. They were coming for round 2, and I was ready. I didn't waste a second. My boots hit the porch steps fast and heavy as I moved across the yard like I was back on a covert mission. Murphy was right at my side, silent and alert, his tail stiff as a broom handle. I didn't turn on any lights, didn't shout, didn't warn. I stayed in the dark, creeping through the tall grass toward the edge of the property where they were coming in through the broken part of the fence. One of them raised the crowbar and pointed toward the main house. The other dropped the gas can beside the charred barn remains. These cowards had planned to torch the rest of my place. But they didn't count on me being wide awake or armed. As they crept closer, I slid behind a tree and pulled my phone out, dialed Sheriff Harris. "Sheriff, I've got 2 intruders on my property again. One with a gas can, one with a crowbar, trying to finish what they started." "I'm 5 minutes out," he said. "Hold tight. Don't engage." But I was already on the move. I didn't fire my weapon. I didn't need to. Instead, I walked up behind them, silent as a shadow, and when I was close enough to smell the sweat on their collars, I spoke one word. "Drop it." The guy with the crowbar spun around, startled, too slow. I kicked the weapon out of his hand and shoved him flat on his back in the mud. The other tried to run, but Murphy blocked him off, barking and growling, teeth flashing in the moonlight. I said, "Drop it," I repeated, now facing the second man who was frozen in place. He raised his hands. I walked over and zip-tied both their wrists behind their backs while they begged me not to hurt them. "You're lucky," I muttered. "The only fire around here tonight is the one you idiots just lit under your own future." By the time Sheriff Harris rolled in, lights flashing again, I had both of them sitting on the ground with their faces in the dirt. I nodded toward the gas can. "Repeat visitors," I told him. Harris sighed, like he was tired of seeing me, but more tired of what was happening. "Names? Don't know yet," I said. "But I've got cameras and they weren't wearing masks. That footage will give you more than enough." He cuffed them both and loaded them into his cruiser. "Frank," he said as he closed the door, "this is getting dangerous." These boys were sent again. Same as the fake cops. Someone's orchestrating this. Ted Warner, I said without blinking. I'll run it through the DA, Harris said. But unless we catch Ted himself on your land, it's hard to stick him. He's not dumb enough to leave fingerprints. Well, I said, maybe it's time to make him act out in the open. Sheriff Harris gave me a long look. You planning something? I didn't answer. He didn't push. After he drove off, I stood under the stars, the chill in the air biting through my shirt. I looked at the ruins of my barn, at the empty field behind it, at the dark sky and darker thoughts clouding my mind. Ted wanted me gone, and he was willing to play dirty. But I had something he didn't: discipline, training, patience, and now a reason to fight harder. The next day, I met with an attorney in town, a sharp lady named Elena Myers. She was young, smart, and not afraid to take on corrupt developers. I handed her the photos, the email copies, the camera footage. Her eyes lit up. This is solid, she said. The only problem is, it's not enough to tie it directly to Ted in court. I don't need court, I said. I need pressure. Can you get this into the local news? Elena smiled. Oh, I can do more than that. I know someone at the regional station who eats stories like this for breakfast. 3 days later, the story aired across 3 counties. Fake HOA cops raid war veterans ranch. Developer linked to threats and fire. They even played my 911 call and showed pictures of the fake enforcement vests. People were furious. Veterans from nearby towns called to offer help. A biker group even offered to watch the land for me at night. But what surprised me most was what showed up at my gate the next morning. A man in a black suit, driving a polished black Cadillac. He stepped out holding a small leather briefcase. I'm looking for Mr. Frank Carter, he said. You found him, I replied, arms folded. I represent Mr. Warner, the man said, his smile thin. He's prepared to make a generous offer for your land. One last time. No tricks. Just cash. I laughed out loud. You think I'd sell now? I said. After everything your boss has done? He didn't blink. Just opened the case and turned it toward me. Stacks of money. Crisp $100 bills. That's $500,000, he said. Tax-free. No questions asked. No deal, I said. Tell Ted if he sets foot on my property again, I won't just call the sheriff. I'll call the news, the veterans office, and every rancher in the state. The man's smile faded. He closed the case. You'll regret this, he said. He turned and got back in the car. But I wasn't done. That night, I got a call from Mike, my tech friend. Frank, he said. You're not going to believe this. I hacked into some traffic cams around your town. Tracked the same 4 SUVs that raided your ranch. All of them are registered to one of Ted Warner's companies. Bingo. He sent me the files. License plates. Photos. Timestamps. Now I had real evidence. I printed it all out and added it to my binder. The next morning, I drove to the sheriff's office and handed it all over. Harris's eyes widened. This might just be enough. But before he could say anything more, his radio crackled. We've got a report of multiple vehicles trespassing on Mr. Carter's property again. Suspected heavy equipment. Repeat, backhoes and bulldozers en route. I stood frozen for a moment. Heavy equipment. They weren't trying to scare me anymore. They were trying to take the land by force. Sheriff Harris looked at me, jaw tight. Frank, you better get back to your ranch right now. I didn't say a word. I just ran out the door, fired up my truck, and sped down the road with Murphy beside me. My fists white on the wheel, my heart pounding. They were coming, to dig up my land. And this time I wouldn't just be ready. I'd be waiting. My tires howled down the dirt road, spitting gravel like bullets. Dust clouds swallowed my tailgate as the ranch came into view, and sure enough, they were already there. 3 bulldozers, 2 flatbed trucks, and 6 men in orange vests and hard hats, standing like they owned the place. I slammed the brakes and jumped out before the engine died. Murphy leapt from the passenger seat and barked like a beast straight out of a nightmare. One of the men waved a clipboard at me. "Sir, you need to calm down. This land has been rezoned under emergency authority. We've been ordered to begin clearing for subdivision development." "By who?" I barked. He flipped the clipboard toward me like it was a badge of honor. "By the Pine Hollow Homeowners Association." I snatched it out of his hand, scanned the paperwork. Bogus from top to bottom. No legal seal. No county approval. Just a made-up emergency clearance authorization, signed by none other than Ted Warner himself. My blood boiled so hard I thought my ears would pop. "Get your machines off my land. Now," I said, voice like steel. One guy laughed. Another smirked. Then the first bulldozer roared to life and began moving toward my pasture, where my goats usually grazed. I didn't think. I acted. I drew my sidearm and fired a warning shot into the dirt 10 feet in front of the bulldozer. Everything stopped. The driver froze. His hands shot up. The other men ducked. One dropped his walkie-talkie and another dove behind the flatbed. "Everybody off the equipment," I shouted. Within seconds, the whole group had scattered like cockroaches. Murphy kept them cornered near the old cattle fence while I made the call to Sheriff Harris. "They brought bulldozers this time," I said. "Unauthorized construction on private property. I've got their equipment ID numbers and the fake permit. I need you here now." "On my way," Harris said, voice low and deadly serious. By the time he pulled up with 2 deputies in tow, the so-called crew had tried to play dumb. "We were just doing what the office told us," one muttered. "You mean the HOA?" Harris asked. "The one with no legal claim over this ranch?" They all went quiet. Harris pulled the clipboard from me, read through it, and then tore it in half. "Load 'em up," he told his deputies. "All of them. We'll sort it out at the station." As they were being led away, one of them, a wiry guy with shaky hands, turned and looked at me. "It wasn't supposed to go this far," he said. "Warner said you were bluffing. Said you'd roll over." I didn't respond. I just watched the bulldozers sit idle under the wide Texas sun, knowing full well Ted Warner had just made the biggest mistake of his life. But I wasn't celebrating yet, because I knew men like him. He wouldn't stop. And later that evening, my suspicions were confirmed. I was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping sweet tea and looking over legal documents with Elena on speakerphone, when Murphy let out a low growl. My floodlights snapped on outside. I grabbed my shotgun and eased out onto the porch. Then I saw it. A man in a suit. Not Ted. Someone younger. He stood just beyond the gate with a white envelope in his hand. "I'm here on behalf of Mr. Warner," he called out. "He wants a truce." I didn't say anything. He stepped forward slowly, like a cat approaching a snake. "He's offering triple what he offered before. No tricks. No raids. You take the money and we leave you alone. Forever." I raised the shotgun, put the envelope on the ground and back up to the road. He obeyed. Once he was gone, I picked it up. Inside was a check for $1.5 million, and a hand-scribbled note. "This is the last offer. If you say no, I can't protect you anymore. T.W." I stood there, porch light flickering, crickets chirping, the wind rustling the trees. It wasn't just a warning. It was a threat. I walked inside and burned the check in the fireplace. Let him come. Let him throw everything he had. Because now this wasn't just about a ranch. It was about respect. About defending what I'd earned, what my father and I had built with our bare hands. About every veteran who's been told to give up when they should stand their ground. And I was going to make sure Ted Warner regretted ever hearing my name. 3 days later, I got a call from Elena. "Frank," she said, "you're not going to believe this." "What?" "Ted Warner filed a court petition today. He's trying to claim eminent domain. He's claiming your ranch sits on land that's now considered vital for community expansion. He's hired a private judge and wants to take it within 2 weeks." My jaw clenched. So that was his final play. Legal theft. "Can he pull that off?" I asked. "Only if we let him. We have one shot to stop this. But we're going to need to go public. I mean loud. Press, veterans groups, every farmer, rancher, and cowboy who believes in land rights. Then let's give him a war he'll never forget, I said. Later that night, while planning a press conference with Elena, my gate alarm blared. I checked the camera feed. A group of masked men were cutting through my fence again. But this time they weren't alone. They had a backhoe, and they were heading for my well, the only water source on the ranch. My eyes narrowed. They were trying to destroy my water supply, and without it, they thought they could break me. They thought wrong. I picked up my rifle, turned to Murphy, and whispered, "It's time." I moved fast, boots laced, rifle loaded, flashlight clipped to my vest. Murphy stayed close, quiet and tense. The masked men weren't moving like professionals. They were jittery, fumbling with the chains on the gate, one of them tripping over the power cord of the backhoe they had just unloaded. They were trying to sabotage my water supply, hoping I'd be forced to leave. But water is life on a ranch, and I wasn't about to let some night-crawling punks kill mine. I crouched behind the hay trailer and watched through the rifle scope. There were 5 of them this time. No headlights, just headlamps, all dressed in black, each wearing cheap Halloween-style ski masks. One guy peeled off toward the water pump with a crowbar. Another opened a toolbox and pulled out what looked like plastic explosives or something designed to look like it. I didn't wait. I fired one round just above their heads. The crack of the shot echoed across the fields like thunder. "Drop everything and freeze." They scattered. 2 ran straight into the fence and fell backward. Another dove behind the backhoe. But the one with the crowbar kept going, swinging at the steel pump housing like a man possessed. Murphy charged, snarling so loud it shook the trees. The guy turned just in time to see 100 pounds of trained German shepherd lunging at him. He screamed, dropped the crowbar, and curled into a ball as Murphy pinned him down, barking with spit flying from his mouth. I ran forward, rifle aimed. Hands where I can see them. The other men came crawling out from their hiding spots one by one. Murphy had already disabled the leader, who was crying under his mask, begging not to be mauled. Within minutes, I had all 5 zip-tied to the old cattle post and called Sheriff Harris once more. "You're not going to believe this," I told him. "I'm starting to believe anything these days," he replied. When Harris and his deputies arrived, they peeled back the masks. 2 of the men were already known for vandalism in nearby towns. One had been arrested twice for impersonating law enforcement. But the last guy, the one who tried to destroy the water pump, was different. He didn't speak much, didn't protest. He just kept looking down, ashamed. Harris took him aside and did a quick ID check. "His name's Corey Warner," Harris said after a moment. "Ted Warner's nephew." I stared. That explained why he kept trying to finish the job. Why he kept going even when his buddies ran. This wasn't just a hired job. This was family business. "He talk?" I asked. Harris nodded. "A little. Says he was told to cripple the ranch by any means. Says he didn't know you'd have cameras or a dog. Or a backbone," I muttered. By dawn, the local news vans were back again. Elena had tipped them off. This new attack on my water supply was enough to explode the story into national coverage. Veteran fights off sabotage to save family ranch. HOA developer's nephew arrested. That headline made it to 3 morning talk shows. Elena went live on one of them. She gave an interview about land theft, legal manipulation, and what she called the war on rural independence. People were finally paying attention. Veterans from across the country emailed me. Ranchers sent supplies. A few even showed up and parked their campers on my property, forming what one guy called a freedom wall. We were no longer alone. But Ted Warner wasn't backing down. The very next day, a private court order arrived at my gate. It demanded I appear in a special hearing, fast-tracked, where Warner's legal team would argue for emergency seizure of my land under community necessity. I handed the papers to Elena. "They're going nuclear," she said. "And if we don't win this hearing, they'll legally own your land within the week." "I'm not going anywhere," I said. Elena leaned across the table. "Good, because we've got one chance. One plan." She laid out her strategy. Expose Warner's corruption live in court, present our full evidence. The fake raids, the bribes, the sabotage. Most importantly, we had to get one of Warner's people to flip. That meant Corey. Elena had already filed to have him subpoenaed as a key witness. He's young, scared. He might tell the truth if we show him we're not here to destroy him, she said. The hearing was scheduled for 3 days later, in a private court office downtown. No cameras allowed. Warner had pulled strings to make sure it was behind closed doors. But we weren't walking in unarmed. When the day came, I wore my dress blues. Not for show, but to remind everyone in that room who I was, what I stood for, and who I was fighting for. The courtroom was quiet. No jury, just a judge with silver glasses and tired eyes. Ted Warner sat at the other table with his 3 lawyers, smirking like a man who believed the land was already his. Elena stood with calm fire in her voice. We are here today because a war hero is being bullied out of his land. A man who served this country. A man whose only crime was saying no to greed. She laid out our entire case, photos, video, written threats, false permits, and the motion detector footage of the attack on my barn. Then she called Corey to the stand. He walked in slowly, hands in his pockets, eyes down. But when he sat and looked at me, something shifted. He cleared his throat. My uncle told us it was just scare tactics, that Mr. Carter would give up if we made life hard for him. He said no one would believe a rancher over a powerful HOA. The room went dead silent. Ted's lawyers froze. Even the judge leaned forward. Corey looked directly at the judge. He ordered the barn fire. He sent me to destroy the water pump. He paid the fake enforcers. I didn't want to, but I was scared. Ted jumped from his seat. Lies. That kid's a dropout and a coward. The judge banged his gavel. Enough. Elena closed with final words. Your Honor, this man has survived war, fire, sabotage, and threats, but he stood his ground with dignity. This isn't just about land. It's about justice, and about sending a message that people like Mr. Warner can't buy freedom or silence. The judge didn't speak right away, but when he did, his words were firm. This court finds the petition for eminent domain to be without merit. All claims by the Pine Hollow HOA are hereby dismissed. This land remains the private property of Mr. Frank Carter. My chest swelled. My hands trembled, but this time from relief. We had won. Outside the courthouse, people were waiting. Reporters, veterans, neighbors. The moment I stepped out, they cheered. But deep inside, I knew it wasn't over yet. Because that night, I got a letter slipped under my door. No envelope, just one line. You think this is the end? I still have one more move. It was signed, TW. The letter burned in my hand like fire. You think this is the end? I still have one more move. TW. I read it over and over that night, sitting by the fire pit behind my house. Murphy curled beside my boots. The stars stretched over the Texas sky like silent guardians. But there was no peace in me. Not yet. After everything, fake HOA cops, arson, illegal bulldozers, and a court battle that had the nation watching, Ted Warner still had one more move. I didn't sleep that night. And sure enough, just before sunrise, I found out what it was. A convoy of unmarked trucks rolled in around 5:30 a.m. Big black ones with tinted windows, the kind used by private contractors. They didn't enter my land. No sirens, no shouting. But they parked along the county road just outside my front fence, blocking access like they were holding position. Then came the drone, buzzing overhead, low and slow. I stepped outside, rifle slung over my shoulder, and stared up at it. It wasn't a hobby drone, it was military-grade surveillance. Someone had money, and someone had pulled major strings. Elena called minutes later, voice tight. Ted filed a federal petition. He's trying to take your land under a Homeland Security Infrastructure Review. He claims your ranch sits over an underground utility corridor that he's pushing to declare a security risk. My jaw dropped. That's not even real. I know, she said. But he's banking on it taking months, maybe years, to sort out. During that time, he thinks he can wear you down, starve you out. Maybe get your livestock seized. Maybe get your access revoked. He wants to bleed you until you give in. No, I said. Not this time. I hung up and walked into my barn. The new one I'd started rebuilding by hand. I opened a storage chest and pulled out a sealed, leather-wrapped binder. It was my sealed deployment log. Inside were names, contacts, allies, and a network that stretched across the country. I made one call, then two, then six, and by sundown they came. Trucks, bikes, horses, even one guy in a chopper. My brothers in arms. Veterans, SEALs, Marines, Rangers, and Army grunts who owed me favors or just believed in what I stood for. They didn't bring weapons. They brought tents, flags, grills, and unity. Within 24 hours, my ranch had become a freedom camp. By day 2, we had local press back again. By day 3, CNN, Fox, and even the Washington Post had crews parked outside the gate. And then, something no one expected happened. Ted Warner was arrested. Elena called me again, this time breathless. "Frank, I just got word. The FBI raided his corporate office this morning. Turns out, someone from his own board leaked everything. Fraud, land scams, intimidation. They had enough to charge him with wire fraud, racketeering, and conspiracy to commit arson. I didn't ask who the whistleblower was. I already knew. Corey." His last words at the trial stuck in my head. I didn't want to, but I was scared. He'd finally found the courage to do the right thing. Warner was denied bail. His accounts were frozen. His HOA dissolved overnight. And just like that, the man who spent 2 years trying to steal my land was headed for a federal cell. I stood at the edge of my porch that evening, watching the sunset paint my ranch in gold. Elena arrived with the final court documents in her hands, signed, sealed, and untouchable. "This is it," she said. "Nobody can take this land from you now. Not by law, not by lies. It's yours, Frank. Forever." I didn't say much, just nodded. We shared a long look of quiet victory. That night we celebrated. Veterans cooked over open flames. Neighbors brought drinks. We sang, laughed, and cried. Even Mrs. Larson danced barefoot in the dirt while Murphy chased the kids around the hay bales. But the biggest surprise came just before midnight. Corey pulled up in an old beat-up pickup. He stepped out, nervous as ever, holding a crate. "Didn't think I'd be welcome," he said. "You did the right thing," I replied. He smiled and handed me the crate. Inside was a handmade wooden plaque, carved with simple words. "The land doesn't make the man makes the land." Underneath, he'd carved my name, the year, and the Navy SEAL trident. I didn't know what to say, so I hugged him. The next morning, the last of the news vans rolled out. The Freedom Camp packed up. The veterans saluted and promised to visit again. Elena returned to her law office with more clients than she could handle. And I walked the full length of my ranch, all 137 acres. I touched every tree, every post. I checked the new barn, the well, and the field where my goats grazed. And then I did something I hadn't done in years. I sat down under the big oak tree in the front pasture, and I rested, because after all the fires, all the threats, and all the battles, this land was still mine, and I was still standing. The Navy SEAL who defended his ranch from fake HOA cops, corrupt developers, and greedy men who forgot what honor means. I didn't just win a legal fight. I won peace. And now the land is quiet again. And so am I.